Welcome to Eat, Sleep, Wine, Repeat, a podcast for all you wine lovers who, if you're like me, just cannot get enough of the good stuff. I'm Yanina Dore, your host, brand ambassador, wine educator, and sommelier. So stick with me as we dive deeper into this ever-evolving, wonderful world of wine. And wherever you are listening to this, cheers to you. Hello, wine friends, and welcome to today's episode. I am thrilled to have on the podcast Vince Anter. He's the creator, producer, and host of the very popular wine series V is for Vino, an independent wine show that takes viewers behind the scenes to uncover the people, the places, the stories behind some of the world's best wine regions. And through this series, Vince doesn't just explore wine, he dives into local culture, history, and winemaking philosophies to just bring the full experience of each wine region to life. If you have not seen this yet, go straight to YouTube and check them out. But whilst I have Vince in the wine chair, we'll get a unique look into Vince's journey from what inspired him to create V is for Vino, the challenges he faced along the way. We'll also get some inside stories from his travels. We'll be diving into his upcoming episode on the Loire Valley in France, which will be out in December. We'll explore what drew him to this region, known for its incredible diversity of wines and terroirs, and get his take on Chenin Blanc, a grape he's especially passionate about. Vince will share his first impressions of the Loire's landscapes and vineyards, and we'll hear about hidden gems, unforgettable winemakers, Loire's legendary castles. But before we go across to the chat, a big thank you to my sponsor of this episode, Coravin. You will have heard me talking in the last few episodes all about Coravin's latest release, a limited edition of their iconic timeless 6+ system in this beautiful green colour. And it's called Forest Green. And it works the same way as the other timeless systems. It uses a needle that pierces through the cork without removing it, allowing you to pour the wine directly from the bottle. And for those of you that aren't aware how it works, as the wine flows out, that system injects argon gas into the bottle, which is what keeps the oxygen out, and it preserves the wine's freshness for weeks, months, and in some cases, even years. But what's especially meaningful about the Forest Green edition is that it supports reforestation. So Coravin, they've partnered with One Tree Planted, and they're committed to planting a tree for every Forest Green Timeless 6 sold during the holiday season. This initiative is already underway, with Coravin aiming to plant 15,000 trees globally. And their goal is to restore biodiversity, to uplift communities, combat climate change, and of course, reduce wine waste. Greg Lambrecht, Coravin's founder and inventor, has always aimed to inspire people's exploration in wine, but also prioritizing sustainability. So, with Christmas just around the corner, if you're looking for a wine preservation tool, check out Coravin's website now. Treat yourself or a loved one and take part in making a positive impact on our planet. And so now pour yourself a glass of wine and get ready to jump into the world of wine with Vince Anter of V is for Vino. So considering wine education is something that's so important for you, I need you to tell me how wine and the whole journey of it took you into recording and creating these wine series so people can learn about the world of wine. How did this even happen?
Yes, you kind of hit the nail on the head with the education being the catalyst. So what happened was I worked in restaurants in Chicago when I was in college. In America in particular, I know you guys don't worry about it, but we pay, you oftentimes college is expensive. So I was working through college, trying to pay the extra, the bills and the rent and all that while I was doing it. And I was in restaurants, and I remember I was trying to get into a nice Italian restaurant, and they wouldn't hire me because I didn't have any wine knowledge. And that really made me upset. And I remembered that when I left and I went to LA. So I went to Los Angeles to be a rock star. It was the goal.
I heard about your musical career. I was just wondering if you were going to bring like a guitar or something and you could sing us into the world of wine. Okay, all right.
I have this dream where one day I incorporate some music into the show that I wrote, and it just maybe one day. Anyway, so I went to LA. I was trying to do that. And while I was doing that, again, was working in restaurants because I was trying to pay the bills. And I had known a little more about wine at this point. And I had a hotel that I was working at sponsor me to take my WSET and my Court of Masters. So I took the certified exam. I did WSET 1 and 2, I believe, and got through all that. And it was okay for me because I was working in the wine field and I had sponsorship from these hotels to pay for these classes. As you know, these classes aren't cheap, number one. They're pricey, and so that's a bit inaccessible. And then the second thing was that even if you had the money and what if you were just an average consumer and you just wanted to learn about wine, but you didn't necessarily want to go take a formal course? And so I kind of saw a problem there. And so the initial thought was, okay, I wanted to make a wine club, actually. I didn't want to do a TV show. I was going to do a wine club with mini wine bottles. You'd get like 24 mini tastes or bottles. And then I was going to make videos to accompany the wines. And it was going to be like a wine education course so that if you're an average consumer, no problem, you can just learn wine. What happened was in America, it's really, really challenging to ship wine. That's number one. It's done state by state. And so it's a whole thing with what they call the 3-tier system. It's almost impossible. As a small business, it's almost impossible.
And I've tried to learn it and I stress out and I ignore it.
Yeah, it's a nightmare. So once I kind of figured that out and I was like, okay, I'm not going to be able to do this. And we also had filmed the first 3 episodes, which were all in California, very close. We put those out and the episodes, even though now I look back at them, I'm like, oh, they're kind of rudimentary compared to what we're doing now. They got a lot of traction. And I remember thinking when I was trying to play music and be a musician, I remember thinking it was really hard to get people to come out to my shows, to listen to the music, to share it. Whereas I put these episodes out and immediately there was a response and like people were really resonating with it. We weren't like going viral by any means, but I knew that we struck a chord with a niche in the market that wasn't being filled. And so I said, oh, this is maybe, can I do this? Can I make this show somehow? And so after the first 3 episodes, I sat down and I said, how can I continue to make this show? Because I basically just saved up some money from my bartending job, funded the first 3 episodes on my own. So how do I make money doing this? It was an evolution. I mean, long story short, this was in 2016. I had the idea. 2018, the first episodes came out. Here in 2024, we've done 21 episodes and we're filming for our 6th season. So
yay. Well, tell me, here we are. Like, how hard is it? I mean, and try and answer this in just a few minutes, not an hour. How hard is it to create this television series by yourself? You don't have a load of professional editors, cameramen. You don't have a huge group of people following you around.
Yeah, it was simultaneously the hardest, but also the most like fulfilling, fun thing I've ever done. But it was very challenging, and it still is, because like you said, we don't have a big production company behind us. We initially put our shows on Amazon Prime, and people thought we were sponsored by Amazon Prime, but we weren't. We were just distributing through them. So we were still doing everything ourselves.
I had no idea. Yeah, I had no idea that was even a thing. Is it still a thing?
Yeah, so we're still on Amazon Prime, but it used to be, it was included like as part of, if you were a Prime member, you could watch it for free. And then during COVID, they changed that. They actually X'd out all their independent content creators. So now you have to pay. So we made the switch to YouTube, which was the best decision we ever made. At the time, it was devastating because all our viewership was Amazon and they overnight demolished our viewership. But we switched to YouTube and long term ended up being great. But to go to your initial question, it's like anything else. You figure it out and you grow as you go along. My other passion is entrepreneurship. I'm very big on going after what you want to do. I remember I hired a business coach at the beginning of this journey. And I said, here's what I want to do. How would you do this? How would you set it up to make money? And so you could make this sustainable. And he basically, at the time, it was a lot of money for me because I didn't have any money. And I hired this guy for, $300 an hour or whatever these business coaches cost. And he came back to me and just basically said, I don't know. I don't have an answer for you. And I was like, I could have at that point said, well, if he can't figure it out, how am I going to figure it out? But I'm very lucky that I was born with parents who were kind of that you can do anything you put your mind to. If somebody's done it before you, then you can do it too. And so I kept going. And slowly but surely, I had some really nice mentors who helped me. We figured out things. I failed a lot like any any kind of venture you would go into. Lots of failure, lots of being ignored. I think a lot of people, when they're starting a project, they think that the failure is going to be like, people yelling at you and slamming the door in your face. Really, what failure is a lot of times is just, you're just ignored. You send cold emails, cold calls, follow-ups, and nobody gets back to you, and you can't make any progress. And that's the hardest part to push through. And we still deal with that. We still have times where I'm like trying to make things happen, and I just have to keep pushing. And so that was the journey, is just a little bit at a time, figure out, okay, I don't know how to edit film, but I have Google and I can figure out myself, because I found out that the editing was actually the most expensive part, the post-production, because filming is only about a week of time and you can hire some people to do it for you. But the editing is months for an hour-long episode like this. And so I didn't have the money to hire an editor. So I was like, I better figure out how to do it myself. So that's what I did.
That's amazing. And what is the best thing about doing this?
The best thing?
Yeah.
It's a little bit of everything. Personally, I get tremendous fulfillment from building things. I love building this and seeing a final product go from like conception to final execution, and then putting it out and getting the feedback. And especially when it means something to people, either they say, it meant something emotionally to them. We've gotten to the point now where some of our episodes do have some really nice emotional elements. And that's kind of the coolest thing you can do as a filmmaker, is if you can make people feel something, that's really cool. And so I love that. I love when people come to me and say, I've helped them with their education. I've got them to try new things or go to places they wouldn't go. That's my other favorite part about it. And just generally knowing that it's kind of this thing that I created from nothing, and now I have a small team and I can help them make money and have a living, like that to me is special.
That's exciting. What about Mexico? You said something to me about a Mexican dinner.
Oh, yeah. That was one of the moments. I had gone and done an episode in Mexico in season... It was 2 or 3. I think it was season 2.
Okay. Was this in the Baja California area?
Yes, Ensenada area. Exactly. The wine area is called the Valle de Guadalupe. And I remember I had really struggled for the first few seasons were really, really hard. I was still working full time as a sommelier or bartender for the first 3 seasons. And so I was doing this when I could get off. I was largely self-funding. We're slowly starting to get some sponsorship revenue and stuff, but I was largely self-funding, and it was just a slog, and I didn't see a path forward. And then we went down to this Mexico episode, and we had this big group wine dinner, and it was one of the first times I had done a group wine dinner with winemakers from the region. And I just remember thinking, oh, I've made it, quote unquote. I'm still not this, super famous person, but I've made it in the sense that we have a path forward. I'm traveling the world. I'm doing something I love. I'm bringing value to the people who are watching. I just got this overwhelming emotion of like, oh my gosh, I'm doing it. And you can see it in the episode. If you watch the dinner scene, you see me get I tear up at the end. I could barely get through my sentence because it was this moment that hit me in the episode. And it was just something that was really special.
I love that. And I think emotion is so important for us when we talk about wine. So I know you have a Loire Valley episode coming out in December. And if I have read my notes correctly, Loire Valley is quite exciting for you because you're a little bit in love with Chenin Blanc.
Yes, and I'm kind of in love with the whole Loire Valley.
Okay, cool, because we're going to talk about it.
Great. Because it has a special place in my heart, because when I was learning about wine, again, I didn't have a lot of money. I was bartending. I didn't have access to a lot of the wines. Now, luckily, I was in restaurants. I could taste some things, but I remember it was one of the first regions where I could go and I could get great examples of fantastic wines that were different and fun and exciting for a price that I could actually afford. It is still a tremendous value region. You can get some of the top examples of Loire Valley Chenin Blanc or Loire Valley Cabernet Franc for a really, really, really reasonable price. And there's not like under $100, oftentimes around 50, 60, the best of the best. And then for daily drinkers, you can get $20, $30, get you great wine. And so when I was starting my wine journey, I just really drank a lot of Loire wines. And then you have a lot of diversity within the region as well, because you have, it's so big, number one, it's huge. I think it's either second or third largest in France after like Bordeaux and Languedoc. And so it's this really, really big area with lots of different styles. You can kind of dive in. And particularly, Chenin Blanc was the first grape that changed the way I think about how white wine could be. Because I always say it's the red wine lover's white wine. It is a very savory, fun wine. And it was the first time I had something like that. I'm used to white wines being citrus and acidity and maybe some tropical fruits and things we associate with sweetness, flavors from oak if you're getting vanilla or things like that. And then you have Chenin Blanc, a good Sauvignon, and you're all of a sudden in like petrol meets flint, meets beeswax, meets, minerality. You're not even talking or thinking about the fruit. And so I was just blown away by that style of wine. I said, oh my gosh, I want to know more about wine because this is incredible.
Do you know, the funny thing is, I don't know if this is 100% true, but actually apparently before the boom in the 70s in California, when then Chardonnay was planted, Chenin Blanc was the number one white.
I know, and they ripped out all the Chenin Blanc and made Chardonnay.
I bet that makes you upset.
It's incredibly upsetting. There's still some places you can find, like Sonoma, I think, has a fair amount of Chenin Blanc. But even so, it's not that popular because it doesn't sell as well. So most wineries, they don't make it. They don't have interest in making it. And it bums me out.
That's so sad. But I suppose that's the wonderful joy about the Loire Valley, because apart from the fact that Chenin is one of their main grapes, but there are those specific areas. You mentioned Sauvignon, which is all about the dry, really mineral style. But you've got Vouvray, which obviously does all the styles. But actually, I love their demi-sec and the sweeter stuff. And they seem to be really good at it. But they're not that fantastic at the botrytized sweet dessert wines. And then we kind of come back along the river and we get all these lovely, Cote de Cham wines. And then you've got the sparkling. And I think that's the point, isn't it? With Chenin Blanc, you can have every different style that white can provide.
That was the thing when I say, okay, I fell in love with Chenin. I fell in love with Chenin at a restaurant that I couldn't afford, but my buddy was the Somm. And so, you know how like when you're young and in the industry, you're like relying on hookups, right? So I was like, okay, I'm going to go over to this Michelin rated restaurant and I'm going to pay, a ton of money for the food that I really can't afford. It's like at the time for me, it's a month's rent, right? Or half a month's rent. But he was like, I'll help, we'll go through, we'll taste some fun wines. It'll be great. And he brought me out over the course of this, 12 course meal. It was classic, like Michelin small plates. He brought out 4 different styles of Chenin Blanc: sparkling, bone dry, aged and off dry, and then dessert. And so that was the catalyst, was seeing all the different styles and versatility could go through was the catalyst.
It's stunning. And actually, you talk about Chenin, but I think what I love about the Loire Valley, and disclaimer, I have not been yet. So you're going to paint the picture for me and all the listeners that haven't. But in terms of tasting the wines, they're vibrant, they're really fresh, they're not, whether you go white, red or pink, they tend to not be too crazy in oak. Obviously fresher, lower alcohol. And actually, I just think for the palate these days, especially in Europe, but I know in America, people are looking for less alcohol as well. And the Loire Valley, unless you want a big, fat, monstrous red, they do it all. And I just think it's a really, really good wine region, not only to explore, but also a lot of single varietals. So you can actually get to know, what does Cabernet Franc taste like? What does Chenin Blanc taste like? What does Sauvignon Blanc taste like? Because they're not doing blends.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I actually found that the Loire Valley was much more terroir driven than I had thought in my head. And I did a couple experiments that proved this.
Okay.
I didn't do experiments that prove, I should say. The winemakers guided me through experiments that prove this, because I started in the far west in Nantes, and then we worked our way inland. And Muscadet, completely underrated.
Totally.
Much more, that grape sucks up terroir so much more than you think it does. I couldn't believe it. Now, the new thing with Muscadet is they have these crus. They're relatively young. I think they're about 10 years old. And they're just establishing this kind of hierarchy. And the Cru Muscadet, honestly, you could swap out some of these Cru Muscadet with some of the best Chablis and you wouldn't bat an eye. They have very similar soils. You're dealing with a lot of the same type of soil, same climate. You're about that far north. You're dealing with a lot of the like Camarigian and or fossilized, seashells and stuff. All this was underwater, right? Millions of years ago. And so you have a lot of the same soils, different slopes. And these wines are mineral driven. They're crisp. They're lean. They develop really well with age. They have the same approximate fruit character and weight, like medium minus body to medium body as they start to get older. They age them on the lees to kind of fatten them up if they can. But it really has this wonderful terroir that I had no idea existed with this grape.
And, I totally agree with you, because I always say to people, oh yeah, great seafood wine, Muscadet, and specifically want a better style, go Muscadet Serve Iman, which of course, as you will know, is one of the major areas. But this specific lunch I did was tasting the specific sub-regions, the smaller crus within Serve Iman. And like Clisson was one of my favorite. And a lot of these have only just been promoted as these little crus. And some were far more tropical. Others were way more savory. And you were like, hang on a minute. This is a grape variety that in the textbooks, they often say, oh, it's a bit neutral. It's salty and saline. It needs the lees aging just for a bit of texture. And it has really, really high acidity. And you're like, oh, okay. And that's not true at all. And so, yeah, that I'm so pleased you mentioned that, because bless those winemakers, they're doing such beautiful things. And I think most of us either haven't even heard of it, don't know what it is. And if we have, we're like, oh yeah, Muscadet, great with seafood. It's fine. It's saline. It's high acid. It's like, no, there's so much more.
Yeah. The tasting I did was with Francois Lebeau, the family Lebeau winery was his wines. And yeah, we had the Clisson there too. And I think we had one other cru as well. And it's exactly what you said. The books, I think, in their defense, I think it's only a recent thing that they've given this much attention. I'm sure it was happening behind the scenes, but I think it becoming well known and available to the public. And these wines probably are just now starting to get exported. Like a lot of times they'll start in their respective regions and then, they have to basically put together a marketing campaign to reintroduce this grape into the world. It's kind of the other side of wine we don't think about. It's like, if you're going to reestablish yourself as a region, there actually has to be some marketing that has to happen. You have to reach out to people and SOMs. They have to get to know about it. Sometimes it can happen organically, but sometimes it takes advocates on the ground going and like showing you this. And so that's what Francois was doing. He was basically he was so excited to show someone like me and now our audience the new face of this grape.
Well, all I can say to everybody, because my pronunciation will be terrible, and I don't personally remember all of these little crus off by heart, but there's Le Palais and Gorge, but you can look online. Loire Valley has a great actual website. After the lunch, I was reading through it, and I remember that they listed every single one of these new crus, and they talk about how they have very different soils and typically what style they make. And actually a few of them have slightly different regulations on lees aging. So anyone who wants to really geek out and understand all these different tiny little crus, everyone listening, go and explore, and then try and find that in your independent wine shop. Try and find a bottle and take it home. Well, so that was one of your biggest surprises. Did you I don't know whether I should stick with whites. Did you find along the river other terroirs and other grape varieties that really surprised you along the way with winemakers? Did they show you something different from the textbooks?
Yeah, a couple different things. So we don't think about rosé from Loire quite as much. I mean, we know they make it, but I didn't know that they're the number one producer of rosé in the country other than Provence. And they also make a few different styles. So you have basically three appellations in Loire for rosé. You have Rosé de Loire. That's just usually the dry style, can come from anywhere and kind of be, and most grapes. But then you have Cabernet d'Anjou and Rosé d'Anjou. And these are wines that I went to a winery, Le Duc Fruin, and they showed me that they do these wines in an off-dry style. And what you end up with is this like strawberry, Jolly Rancher, fun summer sipper. And what they were saying was that these wines are incredibly popular in France. They're not quite as popular here. Everybody kind of gravitates towards the dry style, but it's almost like, I hate to say the word white Zinfandel because obviously it's a blush wine, but it's like their version of just like a fun summer, little bit sweet, fun to pair with some spicy food wine that I didn't know was such a big deal to them in France, but they love it. They drink it all the time.
You're so right. And I always recommend that as my like kind of ace card when people want something interesting with food pairing, because as you know, bit of spice, have something sweet. And the obvious one is, hey, find an off-dry Riesling. And that works beautifully. But rosé anyway, with that fruitiness, is a great food wine. And the fact that there's that extra little bit of sweetness. And I don't know how much of this rosé that you tried, but typically the Cabernet d'Anjou, they take a little bit more seriously than the Rosé d'Anjou. And so actually, you can find all of that really, I love that, Jolly Rancher. Ugh, what a great description. But you get all that delicious fruit, but you're like, oh, actually, this is actually this is some sophisticated shit. So it is a bit of a secret. We don't have too much of it, but we are, for instance, one of our major wine shops, Majestic, typically has at least a Rosé d'Anjou, and we sell that stuff for about £10 a bottle. And for me, I'm like, this is a great little wine secret. So that's awesome that you're pointing that out, because people don't, if they like rosé, they go to Provence, and it's really nice to know that the Loire does some fantastic pink stuff, right?
Yeah, they do. And then just to continue that trend, you're asking like, what else surprised me in terroir driven? Again, I didn't know Cabernet Franc was such a grape that is capable of really expressing terroir until I did a side-by-side tasting. I did it with Domaine Aubert Iffy, another Francois. I did a side-by-side, and we did Chenin and Bourguet and Saint-Nicolas du Bourguet. We did them all side-by-side. And he explained to me the different soils that each one was coming from. And I learned a ton. I mean, basically, so Chenin is kind of a larger appellation, so you can get a bunch of different soils. But for instance, Bourguet is known for its gravel and limestone. And so you get that gravelly aroma that you sometimes get with Bordeaux. I often like left bank Bordeaux. I get it. And I got it with these Cabernet Francs there. And then whereas you get kind of in the Saint-Nicolas de Bourguet, you get sandy soils. And so you end up with a kind of softer expression of the grape. And there were some of the styles were light and easy drinking and fresh and like, okay, I'll serve them chilled. Some of the styles were, oh, I should lay this down. I should have this with a fine meal. Again, we kind of think of Cabernet Franc as a simple, fun, chillable red. And it really, really can produce some magnificent wines.
I've never had a comparison to, I mean, Cabernet Franc, unfortunately, it's one of these wines that I talk all the time. This is the year for Cabernet Franc. And, it never happens. But like you've mentioned those three, and Semur Champagny, which for me, did you get to try any reds, any Cabernet Franc from there or not?
Not on this trip. I mean, I've had them before, but not on this trip.
Because that, for me, I'd love if you've done that at the same time, because as far as I know, because there it's a lot more of the tuffeau soils, those really old kind of limestoney soils. You get this real structure and this absolute, like almost the most elegance of all of them. But again, like you've already said, like those three that you've mentioned, and all four of them now, for anybody who now wants to investigate Cabernet Franc and how different it can be, they're all very close together. They're all pretty much in the center part of the whole Loire Valley. And yet the soils really make such a difference. Has it made you fall in love more with Cabernet Franc?
Yeah. And just generally, I was going to say I had a very similar experience with Cabernet Franc as I did with Chenin Blanc. I like different wines. I like distinct wines. One of my biggest qualms I tell people when you go buy like wine at a grocery store in America is that all the wines on the shelf are meant to taste the same so they don't offend, so that people don't not like them, right? You have to go to a wine shop to get specific wines. I like that Cabernet Franc is a very unique wine. It can have some of those savory notes, greenness that they try and get rid of. But what happens is now that they've kind of defined the grape better, that green from like bell pepper goes away, but you get this green herbal character, this kind of dried thyme and rosemary and kind of herbal character, which I love. You get this really great mineral component, like I spoke about, especially in certain terroir. And then you get this awesome floral component. There's really a kind of violety, rosy thing that can happen a lot. And all of these are non-fruit characters. And so to me, that's so much more fun than another blackberry cassis wine, right?
I totally agree. But, you know, it is so true. There's something more savory, earthy and wild with Cabernet Franc, but at the same time, and mineral and graphite, but it kind of dances. It's got that intensity, and it does still, of course, for anyone who's not tried it, there is still beautiful fruits like raspberries and red currants, but they're more the sour fruits and they're more the wild fruits. You know, you feel like you're actually more out in a forest, and it's a lifted wine. It just dances in your palate. For me, my favorite styles are the more medium bodied, not too aggressive tannins that you can chill down. And the Loire Valley does that really well. But occasionally there are some actually going towards pretty full-bodied styles as well. It can be bigger, but there's something ethereal. It just is a wine that I don't know why it's not as popular. Did the winemakers give any kind of suggestion as why they don't think Cabernet Franc is as well known?
I'm trying to think. I don't know if they did. I don't even know if I can pontificate on why it's not as popular. I mean, I'm okay with it because right now, like, you know how Beaujolais was cool and then 10 years ago, everybody discovered it and now they're all true Beaujolais is very expensive. Like I don't kind of want that to happen to Cabernet Franc. I kind of like being able to buy killer ones for cheap, but I obviously want the winemakers to succeed. So I should hope that it catches on.
We'll see. Maybe 2025 is the year for Cabernet Franc. So what about the Sauvignon Blancs of the Loire or the sparklings? Were they exactly as you expected? Did you find any surprises there?
Yeah, so we didn't actually go to like Central Loire area. So that's actually going to be another episode, I think. I think there's just enough there that, you know, it's such a famous area. But I will say that was kind of one of my value picks is Sauvignon Blanc not from Sancerre or Polyfumé. Like there are Sauvignon Blancs made, especially in Touraine area. There's Sauvignon Blancs made all across the Loire. And you can get it for a much better value than the big names, as most things in wine, if you just venture a little off the beaten path. And they're delicious. And the other one that I really like from a value perspective is Gamay. Yeah, they are making a fair amount of Gamay. And again, for somebody who's mad because Beaujolais got expensive, you can find some great values of a very similar style in the Loire Valley.
Yeah. Well, it's still cool climate, isn't it? So that's a really, really interesting point. And people should go to Touraine. So this is certainly where I'm going to be centering myself when I eventually go, because this is the land of castles. There's like well over 100 castles in the Touraine area. I mean, tell me, please. Tell me you went to a castle or two.
Oh, we did a bunch. First of all, my crew, I had them get there a day early and they were just hitting some castles on the way for some B-roll footage. And then we went to some in particular. So there's over 300 in the Loire Valley, I think in total. Most of them happened during the Renaissance period. Basically what happened was a lot of the nobles from Paris were kind of leaving the city. They went and built these big old second homes and chateaus, and they brought with them designers from Paris to the Loire. And then it was a keeping up with the Joneses situation where, you know, their neighbor had a big castle, so we need to build a big castle. And so you end up with all of these castles overlooking the river, and some of them are big. You know, you show up, you have to buy a ticket, tourist attractions. Some of them are a little more humble. I got to go to Chateau de Chenonceau, which is the famous one that is over the water, and you've, I'm sure, seen photos of it. We kind of did our intro for the episode there.
Okay.
But one of my favorites was Chateau de Chaumont-sur-Loire, because do you know it?
Well, is this the Cinderella one?
No, this one, I'm sure there's one that is very Cinderella-esque. I always thought that was Neuschwanstein in Germany, though. I think that's the Cinderella castle. I could be wrong.
Well, you say that. Remember, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. But basically, there is the Sleeping Beauty one, there is the Cinderella one, and the Beauty and the Beast. So apparently, the actual castles in the cartoons were based on them, and the Sleeping Beauty one, actually the story was written from the castle. I can't remember all the names. But
okay. So I'm sure, so then one of them, at least, I'm sure, is in Loire. But no, the reason I like Chaumont-sur-Loire is because of their gardens. So the castle itself was nice to explore, but they have a garden area where they host a competition every year. So it's a giant area. And there's, I think, like 19 different plots. And every year, people apply as an artist to go create an art installation using the gardens in these. And it changes every year. So you go in these gardens and you go through and you have 19 different art installations, as the best way I could describe it. Like one of them was completely decorated in like white and white stone and meant to feel like you were in the winter of the cold. And then one of them was done in an Asian style, like a Japanese garden. And you go through one by one, all through these 19 gardens. And if you go every year, it'll change every year because they get new artists. So it was really special. We did a little segment there. You'll see it in the episode.
Oh, beautiful. No, honestly, I mean, that terrain as well is known. I come from Kent in England, and it is known as the Garden of England. It's the King Henry VIII dubbed it that, and lots of all the fruit grows there and apple trees, and now of course the most vines, blah blah blah. But terrain, I hear, is supposed, it's the Garden of France. And not only have you got all these castles, you've got those gardens. There's the Villandry gardens that are supposed to be one of the most famous as well. And anybody listening, if you haven't seen any of this, I mean, you Google it, like you can't not fall in love when you're there, right?
Yeah. No, in general, I mean, there's so many to explore. We got a lot of footage of different ones. Something else super interesting was when you were on the West Coast in Nantes. Nantes is a really cool city.
Okay.
And there's this thing called the Machines of the Isle that you can go see. And what it is so Nantes is known for like avant-garde art, and it's also known for, I think, robotics. And so what they did was they took these designs that Leonardo da Vinci had in his notebook of these machine animals, and they created them in real life. And so you go to this place, and there's giant like spiders and lizards and a dragon, and they're giant. The elephant is 4 times the size of a normal elephant, and you can ride on. It's a giant moving robotics machine. It's wild. And then I don't know if you saw. Did you watch the Olympics? Do you remember when they were on this kind of metal horse in the water in the opening ceremony? Did you watch it?
Yeah.
That was made in Nantes because they're known for making that type of creation.
That's so fascinating. Okay, well, there you go, everyone. Right. Okay, well, how long does it take? So Nantes and Muscadet is right on the coast. So we're talking the west part. And then you've obviously got to travel in. You go through Anjou, Saumur, you get to Touraine, which is where we were talking about with the castles. Having not done this, and this is a really long river, the longest river in France, how long would it take you, can you remember, to go from Nantes on the coast to get to Touraine?
Yeah, it's not that bad. I mean, I say that as an American. We're much more used to driving long distances because all the friends were like, "You're going to do all this?" And I was like, "Yeah, I don't mind driving 2 hours a day." But it was probably 4 hours from
that's okay.
place to place. Yeah, from Tours to Nantes is about 3 to 4 hours, maybe something like that.
Well, for everyone listening as well, one of the things that I really want to do is you can do these special tours where you cycle the whole way along the River Loire. You can get electric bikes, everyone. And basically part of it, you have accommodation all sorted. They pick up your luggage in the morning and take it. So you can keep on going along to different wineries and then buy more wine, go back to your hotel room, the new one, then give the luggage back to the car company who's going to drop it off at the next hotel. And I just think the whole thing is fascinating. So just a question, because I know cycling along the River Loire, it's actually quite flat. That's one of the advantages. Did you do any cycling?
Yeah. So my original concept for the episode years ago, I wanted to consider doing like what you just described, full biking. The logistics of that with the film crew, it wasn't going to happen. But we did do, for the outro to the episode, you'll see it in the last few scenes of the episode, me and my wife, we rented bikes and we did some scenes biking. But this is a little like behind the scenes. In the final episode, it will look quite fun and we'll be having a wonderful time and smiling. But I think, the one day that we did it, it was so ungodly hot. And we were in, we try to look good on camera, right? So I'm in a nice, fairly nice shirt. And we would do a scene. We'd bike for, 10 minutes, 15 minutes for the film. And then we'd have to run in the car and cool off and blast the air because we were just clean ourselves up because we're dripping sweat. And then okay, we got to go to the next location and get some more bike shots. Okay, we towel off and go do it again.
Oh my gosh. I mean, this is literally when you put things out on the telly, social media, it's not always the truth, folks. Nobody lives that life of luxury all the time. So nobody sees that. That's absolutely brilliant. So to kind of just conclude this episode, after kind of covering and tasting your Cremant, these lovely rosés, Cabernet Franc, some surprising Sauvignon Blanc from the Touraine region, Muscadet, did you find that there were some sub-regions that you would really recommend to people? Or do you feel like there is the star grape variety that people should go to? What's the standout for you when you just think back now?
That's a good question. One of the things that's a bit tricky is, in fact, when I was writing the episode, I had a challenge basically generalizing even the main regions. What are the difference? I could even describing the difference between, for instance, Anjou-Saumur and Touraine. It's kind of subtle. And then as you go into the sub-regions, you could definitely dive in further. But what I think might be better is I'm sorry, I'm not answering this question well. I found it really, most places I go, for instance, it's pretty easy for me to say, this area has this type of climate and these type of soils. But there's a little bit of the Burgundy thing going on where there are so many small regions and they all have different subsoils and soils. And so you might be better off picking a grape and then exploring that even from one producer. That was the cool thing about the Cabernet Franc tasting I did, was it was one producer, 3 or 4 different terroirs. And so then that's a really, really good way of actually going side by side and trying to understand the differences. But to answer your question, your very first question, I don't know if I'd say there's any particular areas other than you can avoid the big, big names and still get really, really great wines, like the big name producers or the big name regions. And you can still get great wines with all these little in-between areas.
Although, you're right, but I still love Domaine Huet.
I do too. And I like Jolie Sauvignon is one of my favorites. But we did Champollion in the episode, another amazing, affordable winemaker who's big name, but very affordable.
Actually, before we shut this episode down, you did just talk about Jolie, who is obviously Nicholas Jolie, I should make clearer, who is the king, the father of modern day biodynamics in the Savennier region. So if everyone listening, Domaine Huet does Chenin Blanc, but over in Vouvray. And that's a wonderful way to taste some of the best terroirs of that region, but also they do the sec. They do the driest and they go all the way up to Montlieu. So they do all the sugar levels. So that's fantastic. But Nicholas Jolie, he has his own almost monopole, doesn't he, in the Savennier region? I think that he's had a big knock-on effect, hasn't he, for organics and biodynamics in the Savennier region. So if people love the idea of organic wines, biodynamic wines, and dry white wine, actually Savennier is probably a really good place for them to go to, would you say?
Yeah, honestly, the Loire in general there's a lot of people doing those styles of wine. I mean, even Champollion, where I was at, they're using, oftentimes they might not be certified biodynamic, but they are using a lot of those principles. If you're into that, you can find that in a lot of different places in the Loire. They're really big on that.
Okay. I love that. Okay. Conclusion, everybody. Pick a grape, give it a go, choose a producer, try some different ones. And if you can, go to the Loire, get a bike, don't cycle on a hot day, and enjoy. Coming up next week, the conversation continues with Vince Anter, where he's going to share his deeply emotional experience filming in Lebanon and explore how the country's wine culture and history intersect so profoundly. But before we go, a wine quote as always, and this one is from Tom Elkier. God, I'm so sorry. I'm terrible at these pronunciations. He is an American writer and author, and he said, Wine is a passport to the world. I think this simply and beautifully captures how each bottle is an invitation to explore new cultures, landscapes, and histories. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. And if you have, please do leave a rating or some stars on Apple or on Spotify, as this really makes the podcast more discoverable for other wine lovers. Wishing you all a week filled with discovery, connection, and beautifully inspiring wines. Until next week, wine friends, cheers to you.